What's up everyone and welcome back to the World History Channel. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button today. Let's get started. Everything you need to know about royal blood disease, hemophilia. Hemophilia was a dangerous genetic condition that had no treatment for centuries. Children with hemophilia often didn't make it to adulthood, since a bump or fall could cause massive internal bleeding. But why was hemophilia known as the royal disease? In the 19th century, royal intermarriage meant Europe's royal families shared a small gene pool. And Queen Victoria, the product of generations of cousin marriages, carried a rare genetic mutation that caused hemophilia. She gave it to 3 of her children, who later married members of other royal families and spread the disorder. Europe's royals paid a high price for intermarrying for generations. Young boys met their end from hemophilia. In Russia, the Romanov heir's hemophilia pushed his family toward the mystic Rasputin, who promised magical cures. In Spain, 2 royal sons passed after minor car accidents. And Victoria watched her own son, Prince Leopold, struggle with the disease until his passing at age 31. Physicians began to develop life-saving treatments in the mid-20th century, extending the bleak life expectancy of boys with hemophilia. But around the same time, the royal connection vanished, as Victoria's last great-grandson suffering from hemophilia passed just as the Americans swept into Germany during World War II. Close family lines turned hemophilia into the royal disease. Hemophilia wasn't limited to royal families, but royal intermarriage passed on a rare form of hemophilia to multiple families. By concentrating the gene pool, royal intermarriage helped spread genetic disorders. Queen Victoria, for example, gave birth to 9 children, most of whom married other European royals. Today's royal families in Germany, Norway, Russia, Sweden, Greece, and Spain all trace their heritage back to Queen Victoria. Queen Victoria spread the hemophilia genes through her children's marriages to members of other royal families. As a result, hemophilia became known as the royal disease. Queen Victoria single-handedly spread hemophilia to multiple royal families. Queen Victoria of Great Britain ruled from 1837 to 1901. She gave birth to 9 children during that time, 3 of whom carried the hemophilia gene from their mother. Victoria's son Leopold inherited the disorder, while her daughters Alice and Beatrice became carriers like their mother. The rare genetic trait spread throughout Europe as Victoria's children married into other royal families, resulting in devastating consequences. Hemophilia caused tragedy in royal families. For generations in the House of Hanover, royalty married their cousins. Between 1680 and 1840, the royal house saw 6 cousin marriages, 3 with first cousins. The practice of royal intermarriage took its toll on the family, spreading hemophilia among its descendants. Queen Victoria's son, Prince Leopold, passed at 31 after a fall led to a brain hemorrhage. At just 2 years old, Victoria's grandson passed after a fall caused uncontrolled internal bleeding. And 5 of Victoria's great-grandsons met their end from hemophilia. Intermarriage spread the gene to other royal families. Hemophilia B, a rare subtype of hemophilia, was carried by Queen Victoria. As her children married into other royal families, many brought the genetic disease with them. Hemophilia was seen in royal families in Germany, Spain, and Russia. In Russia, the Romanovs married into Queen Victoria's line when her granddaughter Alex married Tsar Nicholas. Their son and heir Alexei had hemophilia. In 2009, an article published in Science genetically proved the Romanov family, including daughter Anastasia, carried the genetic mutation for hemophilia B. The Romanov heir's disease pushed the family toward Rasputin. Alexei Romanov, the Russian heir to Tsar Nicholas II, was hemophilic. Alexei was also a great-grandson of Queen Victoria. The Romanovs feared Alexei's frail condition would be the end of him. In point of fact, Alexei's condition had an impact on Russian history. His mother Alexandra developed a close relationship with Grigory Rasputin, who claimed to have healing powers. Before treatments for hemophilia, the royal family's only hope lay in Rasputin's magic. Hemophilia didn't claim Alexei's life. He was executed at just 13 years old during the Russian Revolution. Doctors once treated hemophilia with snake venom. At the beginning of the 20th century, there were few treatment options for hemophilia. Recent advances in blood transfusions meant hemophiliacs could receive blood from a family member, but the life expectancy for someone with hemophilia remained 13 years old. The U.S. Surgeon General's catalog listed a small number of treatments: inhaled oxygen, applying bone marrow, or using gelatin. In the 1930s, doctors realized some snake venoms caused blood clotting. Diluted snake venom was used to treat some patients suffering from hemophilia. Before blood transfusions, royal hemophiliacs were told to avoid activity. Before the 20th century, blood transfusions were rare and often dangerous. As soon as blood transfusion technology improved, hemophiliacs could receive life-saving transfusions. But before that, royal children with hemophilia were told to simply avoid activity. Queen Victoria knew her son Leopold had a chronic condition that led to bruising and bleeding. Victoria wrote to King Leopold informing him that their son's bruises were because of the peculiar constitution of his blood vessels, which have no adhesiveness. Nothing whatever can be done for it. He may, and it is hoped, will outgrow it, but since June he has been banned from very active amusement. Young Leopold tried to avoid activity, but was nonetheless plagued by swelling, joint pain, and blood in his urine. Childhood falls claimed royal children with hemophilia. Queen Victoria's daughter Alice married into a German royal family. Alice's son, Prince Friedrich of Hesse and by Rhine, inherited hemophilia from his grandmother and mother, who were both carriers. At just 2.5 years old, Prince Friedrich fell out a window. He didn't die from the fall itself. The unstoppable internal bleeding did. Later generations also fell victim to the blood disorder. Queen Victoria's great-grandson, Prince Heinrich of Prussia, passed at just 4 years old after suffering a fall. A Philadelphia physician called the men bleeders. A Philadelphia doctor named John Conrad Otto was one of the first to describe hemophilia. In an 1803 article, Otto described a bleeding disorder that seemed to affect men more than women. Otto also identified a hereditary component. He was able to trace one family line of hemophilia back to a woman who lived in Plymouth, New Hampshire, in 1720. Otto didn't come up with the name hemophilia, though. Instead, he called the men bleeders. Head trauma was a serious concern because of the disease. A head bump could be bad news for hemophilia patients before modern medical treatments were available. Head trauma, which should not have taken the lives of multiple Queen Victoria descendants, ultimately resulted in their deaths. Prince Leopold, Victoria's son, died in 1884 from a cerebral hemorrhage brought on by a fall. In the 20th century, minor accidents caused internal bleeding, resulting in the deaths of Rupert Cambridge, Alfonso of Spain, and Infante Gonzalo of Spain, all of whom were descendants of Victoria. The last of Victoria's descendants to carry the hemophilia mutation, Prince Waldemar of Prussia, met his end in 1945 while waiting for a blood transfusion during the end of World War II. It's possible that 2,000 years ago, hemophilia was first mentioned. Several documents written around 2,000 years ago mention disorders that may have been hemophilia. Baby boys who passed from circumcision are mentioned in Jewish rabbinical writings from the 2nd century AD, allowing parents to opt out of the procedure if 2 of their previous children had died as a result of circumcision. Later texts, including the 10th century writings of Abu Qasim, also mention the disorder. Abu Qasim wrote about a family in which male relatives passed from uncontrolled bleeding. Philosophers from the medieval era discovered that women carried hemophilia. Long before scientists understood genes, philosophers knew some diseases traveled through family lines. Maimonides discovered in Spain in the 12th century that women could pass hemophilia on to their sons. Maimonides incorporated Talmudic law with his own observations. He wrote a commentary on the Talmudic rule that limited circumcision if older siblings had lost their lives due to the procedure, noting the rule applied to half-siblings who shared a mother but not those who only shared a father. In the 16th century, another Jewish code extended the rule to the sons of sisters whose brothers passed during circumcision. The rabbinical scholars were aware that hemophilia was caused because the blood comes from the woman, despite the fact that doctors could do little to treat the condition. In the 1940s, progressive research gave hope to hemophiliacs. In 1828, a student and his professor at the University of Zurich coined the term hemophilia to describe the condition, which was later shortened to hemophilia. It took more than a century for physicians to develop treatments for the disorder. By the 1940s and 1950s, doctors knew that hemophilia was caused by a lack of certain blood clotting factors. After determining the deficit, physicians could develop treatments. In the early 1900s, life expectancy for hemophilia patients hovered around 13 years. However, new blood transfusion technology developed during World War II extended life expectancy for a person with severe hemophilia to nearly 20 by 1960. The AIDS crisis made hemophilia even more of an issue. By 1980, the average life expectancy of hemophilia patients had reached 60 years. That was thanks to new advances in treatments, especially the ability to concentrate clotting factor VIII. Patients with hemophilia A lacked factor VIII, but by concentrating plasma donations from up to 20,000 donors, hemophiliacs could extend their lifespan. That is, until the AIDS crisis. Inadequate donor screening meant factor VIII could carry the HIV virus. With no way to test plasma samples for HIV in the early 80s, over 50% of U.S. hemophiliac patients became infected with HIV. All about hemophilia, the blood disease of royals. For centuries, hemophilia was a deadly and mysterious condition that plagued royal families across Europe, earning its grim nickname as the royal disease. This genetic disorder, which prevents blood from clotting properly, turned minor injuries into life-threatening emergencies. A simple fall, a nosebleed, or even a routine medical procedure could lead to uncontrollable bleeding and death. The disease's dramatic impact on European royalty, particularly the descendants of Queen Victoria of England, shaped history, influenced medical advancements, and even contributed to the downfall of empires. The unwitting carrier who spread hemophilia throughout Europe is Queen Victoria. Queen Victoria, who ruled Britain from 1837 to 1901, was the most famous carrier of hemophilia in history. Though she showed no symptoms herself, as women are typically carriers while men suffer the disease, she passed the defective gene to 3 of her 9 children. Her son Prince Leopold, who suffered from hemophilia, and her daughters Princess Alice and Princess Beatrice, who became carriers. Through strategic royal marriages, Victoria's descendants spread hemophilia into the royal houses of Germany, Russia, and Spain. This intermarriage among cousins, common among European royalty to preserve power, created a genetic time bomb. By the early 20th century, multiple royal families were dealing with the devastating consequences of the disease. The tragic fate of Victoria's descendants. Prince Leopold, Duke of Albany, was Victoria's youngest son and suffered from frequent bleeding episodes throughout his life, 1853 to 1884. He died at 31 after a minor fall triggered a fatal brain hemorrhage. Prince Friedrich of Hesse, 1870 to 1873. Victoria's grandson bled to death at just 2 years old after a fall from a window. Alfonso, Prince of Asturias, 1907 to 1938, and Infante Gonzalo of Spain, 1914 to 1934, were both Spanish princes who passed away in their 20s from internal bleeding following minor car accidents. The Romanov tragedy. Hemophilia and Rasputin's dark influence. One of the most infamous cases of royal hemophilia involved Alexei Romanov, the only son of Tsar Nicholas II of Russia and Alexandra Fyodorovna, Queen Victoria's granddaughter. Alexei's condition was so severe that even a small bruise could cause agonizing joint bleeds and life-threatening hemorrhages. Desperate to save their heir, the Romanovs turned to the mystic Grigory Rasputin, who claimed to have healing powers. His ability to seemingly ease Alexei's symptoms, possibly through hypnosis or by discouraging doctors from harmful treatments, gave him dangerous influence over the royal family. The public's mistrust of Rasputin grew as a result of the Romanovs' reliance on him during the 1917 Russian Revolution. Alexei, along with his parents and sisters, was executed at just 13 years old. Though his hemophilia did not kill him, it played a role in destabilizing the monarchy. Medieval and early medical understanding of hemophilia. Long before modern genetics, ancient texts hinted at hemophilia's hereditary nature. Jewish texts from the 2nd century state that boys were not required to be circumcised if 2 older brothers had passed away during the procedure. Maimonides, a scholar from the 12th century, made the observation that the disease was passed from mothers to sons. 1803 Dr. John Conrad Otto, a Philadelphia physician, dubbed affected men bleeders, and traced the disorder through family lines. Bizarre early treatments. Before the 20th century, doctors had few options. Snake venom, 1930s. Some venoms were found to promote clotting and were experimentally used. Blood transfusions. Early attempts were risky and often fatal due to incompatibility issues. Gelatin and bone marrow. No use but frequently prescribed. For centuries, hemophilia hovered over Europe's great thrones like a curse, a shadowy blood disorder with no known cure that silently claimed the lives of princes and heirs and reshaped the course of empires, not with swords, but with bruises that never healed and internal bleeding triggered by the gentlest fall. The so-called grandmother of Europe, Queen Victoria of Great Britain, passed the deadly mutation to 3 of her 9 children, and from there it spread like a red tide across the continent, infecting the royal families of Germany, Spain, Prussia, and most sadly Russia, where the doomed Tsarevich Alexei's condition gave rise to the infamous mystic Rasputin and became one of the many threads unraveling the Romanov dynasty. Hemophilia, a disorder in which the blood lacks the necessary clotting factors to stop bleeding, disproportionately affects males and is passed on by women who carry the genetic mutation but are typically asymptomatic, making Queen Victoria's role as a carrier especially consequential as she unwittingly seeded tragedy into dynasties far beyond Britain's shores. And while it wasn't limited to royal families, the highly public deaths of young princes, from little Friedrich of Hesse, falling from a window at age 2 and bleeding out, to Victoria's own son Leopold dying from a cerebral hemorrhage after slipping and hitting his head, made it impossible to ignore the genetic toll of royal intermarriage, where bloodlines were treated like property, to be preserved and purified through incestuous unions that only served to spread the disease. Indeed, between 1680 and 1840, the House of Hanover saw at least 6 cousin marriages, including 3 between first cousins, and Victoria herself was the product of generations of such arrangements, her marriage to Prince Albert further cementing the dangerous inheritance that would doom their children and their children's children. And although medical understanding of hemophilia was crude throughout the 19th century, doctors referring to sufferers simply as bleeders, and prescribing little more than rest and avoidance of physical activity, some ancient thinkers had already observed its inheritance patterns, with 12th century philosopher Maimonides noting that the disease seemed to pass from mother to son, and Talmudic law even excusing Jewish parents from circumcising male infants if 2 previous sons had died from bleeding, showing that even in antiquity, some grasped the maternal transmission of what would later be identified as hemophilia A and B, the latter of which was the type Victoria carried. And yet, despite this wisdom, modern medicine would take centuries to catch up, as early treatments remained rudimentary and desperate, including the application of bone marrow to wounds, the inhalation of oxygen, and bizarre experiments with gelatin and even diluted snake venom in the 1930s, which some physicians believed might stimulate clotting, though success was rare and often anecdotal at best. Still, the tragic stories piled up, like that of Victoria's great-grandson Prince Rupert, who suffered a car accident and died of brain bleeding, or Spain's Infante Gonzalo, who died after bumping his knee in a car crash, both proving that even the smallest injury could prove fatal, and the brutal reality was that many royal children died in early childhood or adolescence, unable to survive the normal bruises and stumbles of growing up, and often confined indoors in a kind of medical imprisonment, forbidden from running, climbing, or roughhousing for fear their own blood might kill them from the inside out. A sentence made all the more tragic because they were born into wealth and privilege that could not save them. And perhaps no royal family's fate was more dramatically shaped by hemophilia than the Romanovs, as Tsarevich Alexei's affliction made him the weak link in the Russian monarchy's line of succession and drove his mother, Empress Alexandra, into the arms of the mystic healer Rasputin, whose apparent ability to ease the boy's symptoms earned him Alexandra's complete trust, allowing him to meddle in state affairs and fuel popular resentment of the imperial family. Resentment that helped light the fuse of the Russian Revolution, during which Alexei, despite surviving hemophilia, was executed at just 13 years old alongside his family, Another victim not of his disease but of the domino effect it triggered. Meanwhile, back in Britain, Victoria had tried to make peace with her son Leopold's condition, writing letters lamenting his fragile state and referring to his peculiar constitution of the blood vessels which have no adhesiveness, acknowledging the helplessness of even the most powerful monarch in the face of a genetic disorder that had no cure and few viable treatments, as transfusions remained risky and largely ineffective before the 20th century, and the understanding of clotting factors was still in its infancy. It wasn't until the 1940s and 50s that researchers began to isolate the different types of hemophilia, identifying factor VIII deficiency as hemophilia A, and factor IX deficiency as hemophilia B, and slowly developed plasma-based treatments that could extend life expectancy into adulthood, with the real breakthroughs coming during and after World War II, when blood banking and transfusion technology improved rapidly, though not without new dangers. In the 1980s, a new plague, AIDS, swept through the hemophiliac community due to tainted blood products, especially concentrated factor VIII pooled from thousands of donors, and tragically, over half of U.S. hemophiliacs became infected with HIV due to inadequate screening, a modern echo of the historical vulnerability that once claimed Victoria's descendants, and yet today, thanks to gene therapy trials and recombinant clotting factors, many people with hemophilia live full lives, no longer haunted by the threat of a paper cut or a bruised knee. But the legacy of hemophilia in Europe's royal houses remains a sobering lesson about power, biology, and the unintended consequences of maintaining pure bloodlines, and in the case of Queen Victoria, her hemophilia gene outlived the empire she helped shape, claiming the lives of princes and crippling dynasties until the last of her hemophiliac great-grandsons, Prince Waldemar of Prussia, died in 1945 while waiting for a blood transfusion during the final days of World War II, just as American troops stormed Germany and history closed the book on an era of monarchs who ruled kingdoms but were helpless against the slow, quiet tyranny of their own blood.